horse and buggy days. I have many fond memories of the old horse and buggy days, as they are referred to now. Those days ended or faded right after the First World War. That's when machines took over from the horse. Automobiles and tractors. I still feel and smell the sweat from a horse that gave the fullest of its power freely to its master without anything in return but food and water. There was no worry of running out of gas, engine repair, repairing tires, or the many things that go wrong with the machine. It made no difference if it rained or snowed or how hard the wind blew. Trees, rocks, hills, or swollen rivers could not stop the horse. He went willingly where man guided him. Man reached his highest degree of pleasure either riding on his back or being pulled by him. No smog or poison gas to fill our lungs, only fresh, pure air. Slower on a well-made road, but no fear of crashing into another horse either. There was a true feeling of pride in driving a team of well-matched horses. Much more pride if you owned them. The same with a single driver or a saddle horse. They were worth real money even with the lower value of the dollar in those days. The better match the team in color and style, the better the price. Their glossy coats matched in color, their heads held high with a check bit, and stepping out and high brought a pang of joy to every horse lover's heart. The same was true with the single driver, whether he be a trotter or a pacer. And the saddle horse? Well, he was something again. The color did not matter so long as his coat was glossy and shiny. With him, it was what he could do, how smooth he rode, his speed, and how he could handle the work he was called on to do. This was where the money value lay. Not only was this true with the light horses, but the same was in the case of the heavy breeds or work horses. You only see those heavy too, the case 4 or 6 horse teams on TV now and again these days. They were common in the old days. It was not uncommon to see teams of 12 to 20 horses strung out hauling 3 or more wagons or sleighs loaded with grain or coal. A man wasn't a farmer unless he could put one 4-horse team in the field. Though when we first went out to the homestead, it was not uncommon to see farmers working their land with an ox, or a horse or 2, or 3 oxen and a horse, or the opposite, or 4 oxen. They were slow, but powerful. Dad was always a lover of horses, as am I. He had some dandies during his lifetime. I had the pleasure of working with some of them, training some of them too. Dad and I didn't always agree on our training methods, but usually, in the end, when the training was finished, we got the same results. To illustrate, Prince and Bob were full brothers. Prince, born first, was jet black, except for 2 tiny white wings in the center of his forehead. His legs, head and body slim and well-formed, about as near perfect as one could wish for. Dad had visions of a perfect team coming up if he could get another colt from the same parents. Dad forbid me from having anything to do with Prince, except to see that he had feed and water. A year later, Bob was born. Except for the color, there was no resemblance to Prince. Long hair, chunky and scrawny. Whether it was poorer feed, the long hard winter, or the extra work hauling the mail while his mother was with foal, it's hard to say. Or maybe his mother was getting too old. Something went wrong and Dad's dream broke like a bubble. However, the potential in Prince for an outstanding single driver was still there, so he gave him extra time in his grooming, feed, and care. He entirely ignored Bob, believing that he had little chance of living to adulthood. If he did, he would be of little value. I pleaded for the tiny colt, so Dad gave him to me. My joy was complete. I could do as I wished with him, and just prove to Dad that I had some horse sense, even though I was just a kid. Like all other animals I had anything to do with, Bob soon became a special pet to be played with, given extra attention and rewarded with extra tidbits like candy or extra feed of grain. Like my calf, Fred, he followed me like a puppy. He learned fast. We rolled over and under him. He was so light, 2 of us could fit up his front legs and make him walk on his hind feet. This got to be quite an enjoyable show-off trick among many others he did when he got older and did them on his own. When he was older and strong enough to carry me, I rode him using a halter or just my legs to guide him. It was like sitting in a rocking chair. He had a long stride when he walked and a nice, easy lop when going faster. When any of the other kids rode him, they had to use a bridle to get him to go where they wanted him to go. He came to me on the run from as far away as he could hear me whistle. He knew there would be something special, like a piece of candy or some sugar, ready for him when he got to me. We always had to bring the cows in for milking. There were never in the yard when we wanted them. Most times, neither was Bob. I would let out a shrill whistle, and Bob would come on the run. I gave him his treat, then jumped on his back and went for the cows. Sometimes, if Bob was around, the building marshal or earl would put the bridle on him and bring the cows in. The boys had to help milk. Never let it be said, I never pulled anything on anybody. They did the same to me when they got a chance. One evening, when they were in a hurry to go somewhere, Marshall went for the cows. They were at the far end of the pasture. He had just started to round them up when I thought I would pull a joke on him and see what happened. I whistled, and Bob heard me. He turned around and headed towards me. Marshall had not heard the whistle and couldn't figure out what had come over Bob. He tugged and pulled on the bridle bit, to no avail. He pulled so hard, Bob stopped. Marshall let the reins loose and Bob started bucking. With no saddle to hang on to, Bob piled him on the second buck, then came to me. Marshall surmised what happened. Not to waste more time, he rounded up the cattle on foot and drove them home. When we sat down to milk, he directed some pretty spicy cuss words, some I had never heard before, in my direction. Then he lapsed into complete silence. I just smiled to myself. My little joke on him had worked perfectly, and my faith in Bob went up several points. It was spring, and a number of mares were due to fall. It was Sunday, and Dad wanted to check them. All the horses were down in the far pasture, nearly a mile away. It would be a long walk. He was aware of how I had trained Bob, so rather than walk, he decided to take his first ride on him. He asked me to call Bob. I did. When he came, Dad told me his intentions. I told him I would bring up the mares for him because I didn't think he could ride him. His answer was that he could ride anything I could. I did not argue further. He asked if he neck reined. I said yes. He told me to put the halter on so he could hang on to him when he got off to check the mares. He got on and kicked his heels into Bob's stomach to get him going. Bob headed for the barn. Whichever way Dad pulled on the rope, that's the way Bob went. He couldn't get him headed down the long lane separating the grain field that led to the pasture. I suggested he use a bridle. I could see he was losing his patience with Bob. He agreed. He took off the halter and put on the bridle. All the time I was doing it, he was giving me hell for the method I used to train. With the bridle on Bob, it was easy to control. Again, a kick in the stomach, and Bob headed down the lane at a fast trot. Riding bareback on a trotting horse is rough and uncomfortable at the best of times. To get Bob into his easy, lopping, or galloping gait, Dad gave him another kick. Bob responded into a gallop. Now at the end of the lane there was a gate leading into the grain field and a sharp right turn into the pasture. Bob was going at a pretty fast clip as he heard and neared the end of the lane. Dad was holding the reins fairly tight to slow Bob down for the turn, at the same time leaning over for the turn. Bob was thinking of the turn and did not notice Bob had increased his speed. Trouble was, Bob had no intention of making the turn and went straight for the gate. Too late, Dad thought he was going to jump it, so tried to straighten himself for the jump. Totally unprepared, Bob did the thing furthest from Dad's mind. When he got to the gate, going full out, he set his feet and came to a sudden stop. Dad sailed over Bob's head and landed hard in the grain field. Bob stood for a moment watching Dad, then trotted back to me with the reins dragging just far enough to the side so he wouldn't step on them. Dad made no attempt to get to his feet, so I jumped on Bob to go see how bad he was hurt. The fall had stunned him all right, but otherwise he didn't look to be hurt badly. He came to shortly after I got to him. He was still dazed when I helped him to his feet. He noticed Bob standing in the same place he was when he had taken off in full flight. He asked how I got there so fast. When I told him Bob had come back to me, all he said was, "Well, he knew enough to go for help anyway. That's something to his credit." He was bruised and shaken up some, but most of all, it was his pride that suffered most. When Bob reached his maturity, he had developed into a good match for Prince. Dad had trained Prince to be a trotter, and he was good. On the other hand, I had trained Bob to get over the ground with long strides when he walked and lopped or galloped at a faster pace. Driving them together, whenever there was a chance, Bob matched Prince's trotting pace, and they were developing into the team Dad had dreamed of. Dad had decided to sell out and move to Killam just as they reached their peak. We would have to sell them. By this time, their fame for beauty had gained publicity. One afternoon, just before the sale, a horse buyer stopped at the store wanting to see what young horses Dad had for sale. We had 5. He was commissioned to buy horses for the cavalry. Bob and Prince caught his eye as soon as he saw them, and he made an offer for them, which Dad refused. He wanted Dad to show why his offer was not high enough. Dad had shown many horses at county fairs, so he knew how to make them show their best. He put Prince through the ropes, and after much haggling, Dad accepted his offer of $300. He had never got along very well with Bob, so was not at all sure what Bob might do. He said, "Urban, it is your turn. You better handle Bob." I had never shown a horse before, but knew what Bob could do, and that I could get the best out of him. I was aware that he was a nice-looking horse, so concentrated on his actions with the halter, the saddle, and bridle, and the tricks I had taught him. He came through with flying colors. I could see the surprised look on Dad's face. Apparently, Dad had no idea of just how good Bob was. The buyer offered the same price for him. It was easy to see by the expression on his face that he had fallen in love with Bob, and it did not take much urging to get his offer up to $350. After more haggling, Dad accepted his offer of $385, and he drove away with them. I would be lying if I said I didn't shed a few tears at seeing Bob go, but with Dad's comforting arm on my shoulder, somehow the pain was easier to bear. I had known for some time Bob would have to be sold, but when the time came, it was not any easier to see him go. 2 years later, I went to the Sarcee training camp with the 35th Central Alberta Horse Regiment. All the units were called out to take part in a general inspection parade. We formed a long line at the base of the hill. Our unit was stationed near the center. Glancing to the end of the line, I received a thrill when I saw the bright red jackets, brightly polished accoutrement, and the splendid horses of the inspection party coming down the line towards me. As they came closer to us, I recognized Bob, as pretty as any of them, and I pursed my lips to whistle at him. When I suddenly remembered, you don't whistle when you're on parade. So I closed my lips before a sound got through. The party passed by us and continued down the line. that was the last time I ever saw Bob. When I recall that on my first parade and seeing Bob in it, and knowing that he would never forget the training I had given him, I have to smile to myself. In my mind's eye, I can see the hilariousness Bob would have made of that so sedate inspection party to get to me, had I made good my intention and whistled to him. A thing like that is not easily forgotten in the army. Then, just maybe, my long career in the army would have ended at its very beginning.